The spark of tension. Maya Johnson had always loved the thrill of air travel. As a young black woman in her late 20s, she often found herself at the intersection of ambition and opportunity, ready to conquer new horizons. This trip was particularly special. She was heading to see her family after a long work week, her heart brimming with excitement and anticipation. The airplane cabin buzzed with the sounds of passengers settling in, the scent of airplane food mingling with the artificial freshness of air conditioning. Maya leaned back in her seat, releasing a long sigh of relief. She was finally on her way. However, as the plane began taxiing down the runway, a cloud of tension swept over the cabin that would soon disrupt her peaceful journey. Passengers shifted uneasily as they buckled their seatbelts, and Maya took a moment to rearrange her belongings in the overhead compartment. As she reached for her suitcase, a middle-aged white man with a scowl on his face abruptly pushed past her. Without so much as an apology, he shoved her aside and claimed the space above her head for his own luggage, disregarding Maya entirely. Stunned, Maya blinked at him, struggling to maintain her composure. "Excuse me, but I had already placed my luggage here," she managed to say, her voice calm yet firm. The man turned slowly, his eyes narrowing as he looked her up and down with disdain. "You should know your place," he replied curtly, his tone dripping with contempt. Maya's heart sank. The words landed heavily in her chest, igniting a feeling of humiliation and anger that swirled like a storm within her. She was not just being dismissed. She was being belittled in a way that felt deeply personal. The plane seemed to hold its breath, passengers around them averting their eyes, as if they could will the scene away. Breathing deeply to steady herself, Maya tried to remind herself that she would not let this man's words define her. She cast a glance around the cabin, hoping to find an ally. But instead, she was met with the indifference of others who, like her, felt the weight of this moment. The flight attendant approached, her smile quickly fading as she sensed the tension. "Is everything all right here?" the attendant asked, but her gaze was focused more on the man than on Maya. It was clear who she was expecting to side with. Maya opened her mouth to explain, but before she could get a word out, the man interjected. "Oh, she's just making a big deal out of nothing." "Nothing serious," he scoffed, his voice mocking. The flight attendant turned her attention back to Maya, her expression now one of annoyance. "Ma'am, if it's not serious, I think it's best for you to keep quiet and not disturb the other passengers," she said, her tone soft but laced with an icy edge. Maya felt her heart race, disbelief washing over her. Here she was, a victim of this man's arrogance, and the attendant was blaming her for simply standing up for herself. The humiliation cut deep, and she fought back tears as she realized she was utterly alone. The attendant had chosen to ignore her experience, siding with the man who had acted so disrespectfully. "But he took my space without even asking," Maya protested, desperation creeping into her voice. The attendant merely shrugged, her indifference palpable. "The luggage space is shared. You can find another spot if you're uncomfortable," she said, her dismissive attitude a further blow to Maya's already wounded pride. Maya sat back down, swallowing hard as frustration bubbled within her. The man's triumphant smirk caught her eye, and it made her stomach turn. How could he feel victorious for treating her like this? She felt isolated in a sea of indifference, the other passengers avoiding any interaction, leaving her to bear the weight of the injustice alone. "Keep quiet, girl," the man taunted, his voice dripping with disdain. "People like you always make a big deal out of everything." Each word felt like a blow, striking at her self-worth. Maya clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms as anger surged through her. She wanted to retaliate, to stand up for herself, but the suffocating atmosphere in the cramped cabin felt like a cage closing in around her. The other passengers began to stir, some whispering among themselves while others cast furtive glances her way. The man's confidence seemed to waver as the murmurs grew louder, a faint sign that the tide might be shifting. It was a moment of potential, a flicker of hope that someone might stand beside her in this fight. Just then, a middle-aged woman seated a few rows back leaned forward. "Can you stop?" she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. The man turned, surprised at the unexpected challenge. "She's done nothing wrong. Why are you treating her like that?" The woman continued, her gaze unflinching. Maya felt a rush of gratitude. Here was someone willing to confront the man, to advocate for her when she felt so small. The woman's words ignited a spark of courage within Maya, urging her to reclaim her voice. "Thank you," Maya said, her voice shaking but determined. "I won't stay silent. I'm not causing trouble. I'm simply trying to exist in this space like everyone else." The man's bravado began to crumble as the surrounding passengers nodded in agreement. A few even murmured their support, and Maya could feel the shift in the air around her. The woman's bravery had sparked a collective recognition of the injustice, and it empowered Maya to rise above her circumstances. "I have a right to be here just as much as you do," Maya continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I won't allow you to intimidate me or make me feel less than." With the support of her fellow passengers, Maya felt emboldened. The plane was no longer just a metal tube in the sky. It was a place of unity against prejudice and a stand for what was right. The man's face turned crimson as he looked around, realizing that his cruel words and actions had consequences, and that he was no longer the only one in control of the narrative. In that moment, as Maya stared him down, she knew that this battle was about more than just luggage space. It was about dignity, respect, and the fight against the pervasive racism that still existed in the world. As the plane soared higher into the sky, so too did her resolve. She was ready to face whatever came next, knowing she had allies in the most unexpected places. Rising tensions. As the airplane leveled off, a sense of stillness enveloped the cabin. Maya's heart was still racing, a mixture of adrenaline and empowerment coursing through her veins. The confrontation had transformed her from a quiet passenger to a beacon of resilience, but the road ahead was uncertain. She could still feel the weight of the man's contempt, and as she settled back into her seat, she knew the battle was far from over. The middle-aged woman who had spoken up for Maya smiled at her from a few rows back, and their eyes locked in a moment of silent understanding. It was a bond forged in the heat of adversity, and for the first time that day, Maya felt a flicker of hope amidst the gloom of her earlier experience. She was not alone in this fight. A few minutes passed, and the flight attendants began their in-flight service, offering drinks and snacks. Maya took a deep breath, grateful for the distraction. As she sipped her ginger ale, she couldn't help but glance over at the man who had started this whole ordeal. He sat a few rows ahead, glaring back at her with an expression that could only be described as sour. She felt a surge of satisfaction at the thought that he was now the one who felt uncomfortable. Just then, the flight attendant who had dismissed her earlier approached the man, and Maya felt her stomach drop. She watched as the attendant leaned down to speak to him, her body language suggesting concern. Was she really going to give him more attention after everything that had happened? Maya's heart sank further as she prepared herself for another wave of disappointment. "Sir, is everything all right?" the attendant asked, her voice filled with Fox's concern. "I noticed some tension earlier." Maya's jaw clenched as the man launched into a rehearsed story, painting himself as the victim. "I'm just trying to enjoy my flight, but that woman is causing a disturbance," he said, his voice loud enough for those around him to hear. "I don't understand why people like her always have to make everything so complicated." Maya felt the blood rush to her face. His attempt to play the victim while disparaging her was not just infuriating. It was indicative of the very prejudice she had faced her entire life. She fought to keep her composure as she overheard the attendant's response. "I understand, sir, but it's important for all passengers to respect one another's space," she replied, her tone tepid and lacking conviction. Maya wanted to scream. How could the attendant not see through his lies? Wasn't it her job to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers, regardless of race or background? The other passengers began to murmur again, sensing the growing tension. Maya leaned forward, wanting to interject but holding back. unsure if she should take the risk of drawing more attention to herself. She glanced around at the faces surrounding her. Some were sympathetic, others merely curious, and a few wore expressions of discomfort. "Are you going to let him talk to me like that?" Maya finally said, her voice firm, as she turned her focus back to the flight attendant. "It's not okay to dismiss someone's experience simply because you don't want to get involved. You're supposed to ensure everyone feels safe." The attendant hesitated, taken aback by Maya's assertiveness. It was clear she was not used to passengers standing up for themselves, especially when confronting a perceived authority figure. The attendant's eyes flicked nervously to the man, and for a moment, it seemed she might finally recognize the imbalance of power that had been at play. "Ma'am, I appreciate your input," the attendant said, her tone softer, "but it's also important to maintain a peaceful environment on this flight." Maya's frustration bubbled over. Peace at the cost of justice is not peace at all. "I deserve the same respect as everyone else on this plane," she shot back, her voice rising as the courage within her surged. The murmurs around the cabin grew louder, and she felt the collective energy shift once again. "Look," said a young man seated nearby, his voice steady. "We all saw what happened. No one should be treated that way. It's not just about keeping the peace. It's about standing up for what's right." The man's words ignited a spark among the other passengers, who began nodding in agreement. Maya felt a wave of support wash over her, and she couldn't help but smile at the camaraderie forming around her. This was not just her fight. It was a shared battle against the injustice of racism and discrimination. The middle-aged woman who had first spoken up chimed in again, her voice unwavering. "If you want peace, then the man needs to acknowledge his wrongdoings. Ignoring it will not make it go away. We're all here together, and we deserve to feel safe." Maya's heart soared at the words of her fellow passengers. She had felt so isolated before, but now, the community that formed around her gave her the strength to stand tall against the tide of prejudice. The man who had insulted her now looked smaller, his arrogance challenged by the solidarity of those who chose to support her. The flight attendant, realizing the gravity of the situation, cleared her throat. "I apologize for any distress caused," she said, her tone more sincere. "It's important that everyone feels comfortable during this flight. I'll be monitoring the situation closely." The man bristled, and his expression darkened as he recognized that he was no longer in control of the narrative. The power had shifted. He was no longer the unquestioned authority in this scenario. The other passengers had found their voice, and they were not going to let him continue to intimidate Maya without consequences. As the plane continued its journey, Maya sat back in her seat, buoyed by the support she had received. She realized that despite the ugliness of the confrontation, something beautiful had emerged from it, a shared commitment to standing against prejudice. In that moment, she knew she would not back down. The fight was not just about her. It was about everyone who had ever been marginalized, dismissed, or belittled. As the airplane soared through the clouds, so did Maya's spirit, unyielding and resolute. Confronting the past, the airplane cruised smoothly through the sky, but within Maya, turbulence brewed. As the cabin settled into a hushed calm, she felt the adrenaline begin to wane, replaced by reflection. This journey was not just a physical one. It was also a profound emotional voyage. She thought about the man who had insulted her and the myriad of experiences that had led her to this point. For Maya, the confrontation was a flashpoint, igniting memories of her past encounters with racism and discrimination. As a child, she had often been told to keep her head down, to avoid trouble, and to accept slights in silence. Her parents had instilled in her a sense of dignity, teaching her to rise above hate. But now, she wondered if that philosophy had inadvertently taught her to tolerate injustice. The voices of the passengers who had rallied around her echoed in her mind. She felt a growing determination to no longer accept being sidelined. The support she received showed her that silence was not the answer. Standing up for oneself could inspire others to do the same. With renewed resolve, Maya decided that this was not just about this flight. It was about her journey moving forward. She would no longer allow the past to dictate her actions. This moment was a catalyst for change, not just for herself, but for others who might find themselves in similar situations. As she gazed out the window at the clouds, she thought of her younger sister, who was also coming to the family gathering. Maya had always been protective of her, especially in a world that could be so harsh. It made her realize that her experiences weren't just her own. They would ripple through to her sister, her family, and the community. It was time to break the cycle of silence. "Excuse me," Maya said, turning to the middle-aged woman who had first defended her. "I want to thank you for speaking up earlier. It really meant a lot to me." The woman smiled warmly. "I'm glad I could help. It's important to support each other. We can't let people like that man silence us." Their conversation drew the attention of other passengers nearby, and soon a small group formed around Maya. They shared their own stories of prejudice, discrimination, and the moments they had chosen to speak out or remain silent. Each story resonated deeply with Maya, further solidifying her resolve to embrace her voice and advocate for herself and others. As the tales unfolded, Maya felt a sense of camaraderie blossom. She was no longer just an individual facing a bully. She was part of a collective narrative that spanned beyond this flight. The shared experiences created a bond, turning strangers into allies. One woman recounted how she had faced discrimination at work for her accent, while a man shared his struggles with being viewed as a threat because of his appearance. Each voice added depth to the conversation, weaving a tapestry of resilience and shared determination. As they spoke, Maya could feel the man who had insulted her lurking in the shadows, his presence still palpable. She glanced his way and saw him looking away, visibly uncomfortable. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Maya leaned back and took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of connection to envelop her. She realized that their collective voices had a power that could not be ignored. The energy shifted, and it was no longer just about her fight. It was about igniting a movement, a commitment to standing up against prejudice and racism wherever it arose. The flight continued, and the group's energy transformed the atmosphere of the cabin. Maya noticed more passengers nodding in agreement, others smiling encouragingly, as if they were part of an unspoken pact to look out for one another. When the flight attendant passed by again, she paused, her expression thoughtful. "I appreciate the way you all are supporting one another," she said, her voice genuine. "It's important to create a positive environment for everyone aboard." Maya smiled at the attendant, sensing a shift in her demeanor. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a sense of validation. It was a reminder that not all authority figures were blind to the realities of prejudice, and that change was possible, even in small doses. As they approached their cruising altitude, the young man who had earlier spoken up for Maya chimed in. "Let's make sure we continue to uplift each other," he said. "Our voices matter, and we have to use them. We can't allow anyone to silence us." Maya nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude and determination. "Exactly," she said, feeling the strength of her convictions solidifying. "It's time we take a stand together." The plane carried on, soaring above the clouds, and Maya's spirit felt just as unbound. With each passing moment, she understood that her fight was not merely about her individual experience. It was about every person who had felt marginalized or silenced. She was no longer just a passenger on a flight. She was a part of something much bigger, a movement for equality, respect, and dignity. In that moment, as the cabin buzzed with conversation and solidarity, Maya made a silent promise to herself. She would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for every person who ever felt unheard. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was ready to embrace the journey with open arms, fueled by the collective strength of those around her. The heart of the matter. As the flight pressed on, the atmosphere within the cabin shifted dramatically. The support Maya had received created a ripple effect, fostering an environment where silence was no longer an option. Passengers engaged in conversation, sharing their stories and experiences, and the initial tension had transformed into a sense of community. Maya found herself engaged in a deep discussion with a middle-aged woman whose name was Linda. They spoke about their backgrounds, and Maya learned that Linda had faced her share of adversity as a woman in a male-dominated field. Linda had always been the type to stand her ground, a trait that Maya admired immensely. I remember a time when I had to confront a colleague who belittled my contributions at work. Linda recounted. It took everything in me to speak up, but I realized that my silence only empowered him. Maya nodded, feeling the weight of Linda's words. I've been taught to stay quiet, to avoid conflict, but this experience has shown me that staying silent doesn't make the problem go away. Exactly, Linda agreed. We have to be our own advocates. It's not just about us. It's about paving the way for others too. The two women shared stories, exchanging insights on how to navigate a world often filled with prejudice. Maya felt invigorated by Linda's wisdom and courage, realizing that her own journey was just beginning. This moment of connection inspired her to think about how she could make a difference, not just for herself, but for others who felt marginalized. As their conversation unfolded, the young man from earlier, whose name was Jamal, leaned in to join them. I've experienced similar situations, he said. It's tough, especially when you're made to feel like you don't belong. But when we stand together, we become a force to be reckoned with. The camaraderie continued to grow, with passengers chiming in to share their own experiences of standing up against discrimination. Maya felt her heart swell as she listened to their stories, each one adding layers to her understanding of resilience and strength. The flight attendants continued to serve drinks and snacks, and when one approached Maya's row, she decided to take the opportunity to share her gratitude. I just want to thank you for your support earlier, she said, her voice genuine. The attendant smiled, her eyes softening. It's my job to ensure everyone feels comfortable. I apologize if I seemed dismissive before. I appreciate how you stood up for yourself. It's important for everyone to feel heard. Maya felt a rush of gratitude, realizing that the flight attendant had taken her words to heart. It was a reminder that change could happen in small steps, and she hoped that this moment would ripple out beyond the confines of the airplane. As the journey continued, Maya's mind began to race with possibilities. What if she could turn this experience into something more significant? She thought of starting a community group focused on advocating for equal treatment and providing a safe space for marginalized voices. The idea filled her with excitement and hope. But just as she was beginning to dream of the future, the man who had insulted her earlier interrupted her thoughts. He had turned in his seat, facing her, his expression hostile. You think you're so special because you got a few people to back you up. He sneered. You're just making a fool of yourself. Maya's heart raced again, but this time, she felt a surge of confidence. I'm not a fool for standing up for what's right, she shot back, her voice steady. You're the one who should be ashamed for your behavior. The other passengers around her murmured their agreement, some nodding in support. The man, taken aback by the collective response, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was clear that he had underestimated the impact of his actions. Why don't you just sit down and mind your own business? He spat, but his voice lacked the conviction it had earlier. It was a desperate attempt to regain control, but the power dynamic had shifted irreparably. Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself. You may not understand, but your words and actions have consequences. You've shown your true colors today, and that speaks volumes about you, not me. The passengers around them nodded again, emboldened by her courage. They were no longer silent observers. They were witnesses to a moment of transformation. You don't get to dictate who I am or how I should feel, Maya continued, her voice rising. Your racism and prejudice are not going to define this flight. We are all entitled to dignity and respect. With each word, Maya felt lighter, as if the burden of silence had been lifted. The man's face turned crimson as he realized the crowd was no longer on his side. The energy in the cabin crackled with the weight of the moment, a testament to the power of standing together against hate. As the flight continued, Maya looked around, her heart swelling with pride. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a catalyst for change. And as the airplane soared through the skies, so did her resolve to fight for a better world. The turning point. The flight continued its course, and Maya felt a sense of exhilaration wash over her. The confrontation had been intense, but she knew that it marked a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone on board. The camaraderie forged in that cabin created a powerful alliance, and as they traveled through the skies, she felt the collective strength of those around her. The man, once so confident in his arrogance, now sat in silence, clearly uncomfortable. Maya's heart raced with a mixture of pride and apprehension. She knew the battle was not over. She had taken a stand, but would the support continue beyond this moment? As the plane leveled off, the flight attendants moved about the cabin, and the atmosphere shifted from tense to hopeful. Passengers began to chat with one another, sharing stories, laughter, and experiences. Maya felt an overwhelming sense of belonging, a stark contrast to the isolation she had experienced at the beginning of the flight. Jamal leaned over and smiled. "You really did a number on him back there," he said, laughter dancing in his eyes. "It's amazing to see everyone rally around you." Maya smiled back, feeling the warmth of the moment. "I couldn't have done it without you all. This isn't just my victory. It's ours." The passengers surrounding them nodded in agreement, their faces reflecting a shared commitment to change. It was no longer just a matter of defending one individual. It was about creating a space where everyone felt valued, where voices could be heard without fear of retaliation. Linda chimed in. "It's moments like these that remind us of the power we have when we stand together. We can't let prejudice go unchecked." Maya felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. She had always known that the world could be harsh, but she had never fully appreciated the strength of community until now. It was a lesson she wanted to carry with her beyond this flight, into her life, her work, and her future. As they continued to talk, the conversation shifted to the importance of advocacy and the ways they could make a difference. Maya felt inspired by the ideas being shared, from organizing community workshops to promoting awareness about racism and discrimination. She realized that this was just the beginning. She could take this momentum and turn it into something tangible. "Let's keep this conversation going," Maya suggested, her excitement bubbling to the surface. "What if we created a group that focuses on community advocacy? We could support each other, share resources, and raise awareness about these issues." The passengers around her leaned in, intrigued by the idea. "That's a brilliant idea," Jamal replied, his enthusiasm evident. "We need a platform to amplify our voices and stand against injustice together." With each passing moment, the cabin transformed into a space of empowerment and possibility. Passengers began brainstorming ideas, exchanging contact information, and discussing the logistics of forming a support group. Maya felt her heart swell with hope. This was the change she had longed to see. As the conversation flowed, the plane hit some turbulence, causing everyone to grip their armrests. Laughter erupted as they joked about their newfound camaraderie amidst the bumps. Maya felt a sense of joy, realizing that the adversity they faced had brought them closer together. However, just as the laughter subsided, the man who had instigated the confrontation finally spoke up, his voice shaky but filled with resentment. "You think you've all won something here," he sneered. "You're just making fools of yourselves." Maya felt a surge of anger, but this time it was accompanied by a sense of clarity. She had faced down his vitriol before, and she could do it again. "No, we're not fools. We're standing up for ourselves and for what's right," she said firmly. "You can't intimidate us into silence any longer." The other passengers around her echoed her sentiments, their voices rising in unison. It was a powerful reminder that the fight against prejudice was not just about individual battles but about collective strength. The man's bravado crumbled further, and Maya could see the realization dawning on him that he was outnumbered. His face turned pale, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing that the dynamic had changed entirely. The flight attendant, who had previously been indifferent, approached with a newfound sense of purpose. "Sir, I need to remind you that your behavior is unacceptable," she said, her tone resolute. "This is a space for everyone, and we will not tolerate disrespect." Maya felt a rush of gratitude toward the attendant. It was a small but significant victory, a sign that the tide was turning, and that people were beginning to recognize the power of standing against discrimination. As the flight continued, Maya felt a profound sense of hope. They were in this together, and the collective commitment to change was palpable. The man who had once wielded his prejudice like a weapon now sat in silence, outnumbered by those who chose to stand for what was right. Maya looked around at the faces surrounding her, feeling the strength of their resolve. She knew that this was only the beginning. The conversation sparked on this flight would extend beyond the confines of the cabin. They would ignite a movement of change that resonated far and wide. The plane flew steadily toward its destination, and Maya felt her spirit soar alongside it. She was no longer just a passenger. She was an advocate, a voice for those who had been silenced, and a champion of change. And as the clouds parted to reveal the brilliant blue sky, she knew that together they could overcome anything. A new horizon. As the plane descended, Maya felt a mix of emotions swirling within her. The flight had been a transformative journey, not just for her, but for all the passengers who had come together to stand against prejudice and injustice. As the airplane landed and taxied to the gate, she realized that this was more than just a vacation. It was a new beginning. Maya exchanged contact information with Linda, Jamal, and several other passengers. They made plans to meet after the trip to further discuss their ideas for a community advocacy group. The possibilities felt endless, and Maya's heart swelled with hope and determination. As the plane came to a stop and the seatbelt sign turned off, the cabin erupted into applause. It was a spontaneous celebration of solidarity, a collective recognition of the strength they had found in one another. Maya couldn't help but smile as she joined in, her heart full. The man who had instigated the confrontation sat silently, his face flushed with embarrassment. As passengers began to disembark, Maya glanced his way one last time. She felt a surge of empowerment as she walked past him, chin held high. He had tried to diminish her spirit, but in the end, it was he who had been diminished. Once off the plane, Maya took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. The airport bustled with activity, a stark contrast to the tension of the flight. She spotted her family in the distance, waving excitedly, and her heart leaped. As she approached them, her mother enveloped her in a warm embrace. "I missed you so much," her mother exclaimed. "How was your flight?" Maya hesitated, contemplating how to convey the whirlwind of emotion she had experienced. "It was an adventure," she said, smiling at her family. "But I think I've learned a lot about standing up for myself and for others." Her mother looked at her with curiosity, sensing that there was more to the story. "Oh, what happened?" As Maya recounted the events of the flight, her family listened intently, their expressions shifting from concern to pride. "I'm so proud of you for standing up to that man," her mother said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've always had a strong spirit." Maya's heart swelled with gratitude for her family's support. "It wasn't just me, though. There were so many people who stood up with me." It was a reminder that we're not alone in our fight against discrimination. As they made their way through the airport, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This trip was not just about reconnecting with her family. It was about building connections and fostering change. She would take the lessons she had learned and use them to inspire others, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond her immediate community. The following days with her family were filled with laughter, love, and heartfelt conversations. Maya shared her vision for the advocacy group, and her family rallied behind her, offering their support and encouragement. She realized that she could take her experiences and transform them into something meaningful, an opportunity to create a safe space for marginalized voices to be heard. On the last evening of her visit, Maya gathered her family for a dinner where she unveiled her plans for the advocacy group. They sat around the table, sharing ideas and brainstorming ways to make a difference. Maya's sister, who had been listening intently, spoke up with excitement. "We can start small, maybe organize workshops or community discussions about racism and discrimination." Her sister's enthusiasm ignited a fire within Maya. "Yes, we can reach out to local organizations, collaborate with schools, and create a network of support. It's time we take action." Maya felt the weight of purpose settle over her, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a path forward that was illuminated by hope. Together with her family, they began drafting plans, setting goals, and dreaming of what their group could achieve. As the days passed, the sense of community expanded beyond her family. Maya connected with others in her hometown, sharing her experience and inviting them to join the cause. The support was overwhelming, and soon the advocacy group began to take shape. On the day of their first official meeting, Maya stood before a room full of individuals, each with their own stories and experiences. She felt a rush of gratitude as she realized they had created a safe space for dialogue and connection. "Thank you all for being here today," Maya began, her voice steady. "This group is about standing together against discrimination and creating a community where everyone feels valued and respected. Our voices matter, and together we can make a difference." As the meeting unfolded, Maya felt an electric energy in the room. The conversations flowed freely, each participant sharing their stories, challenges, and hopes for change. They discussed strategies for outreach, community engagement, and how to foster an inclusive environment for all. With each passing moment, Maya knew they were building something significant, something that could impact lives and challenge the status quo. It was a testament to the power of solidarity and the strength of community. As the meeting came to a close, Maya felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. She had transformed her experiences into action, and with the support of those around her, she knew they could challenge the prejudices that had held them back for far too long. The journey had just begun, but Maya was ready to embrace whatever challenges lay ahead. The fight against discrimination would not be easy, but she was no longer alone. She had a community by her side, a network of allies, and a burning passion to create change. In the years that followed, Maya and her advocacy group made waves in their community, raising awareness and fostering understanding. They organized events, workshops, and discussions that encouraged dialogue and promoted inclusivity. They celebrated their victories and learned from their challenges, always striving to be a force for good. And as Maya looked back on that flight, she knew it had been the catalyst for her transformation, a moment that had awakened her spirit and ignited her passion for justice. She had turned a painful experience into a powerful movement, proving that one voice, joined by many, could create a chorus of change. With her heart full and her spirit unyielding, Maya stood ready to face the future. She was more than just a passenger on a flight. She was a warrior for justice, an advocate for change, and a beacon of hope in a world that desperately needed it. And as she soared into the next chapter of her life, she did so with the unwavering belief that together they could overcome any obstacle and create a brighter, more inclusive future for all.